to believe that people can change and can do the sort of hard work of looking inside and find some way to better themselves.
Yeah, and actually spending a lot of time working with children and families who've been physically and sexually abused, you get a sense where people are in dungeons, they feel a sense of darkness, but watching them come out of that after experiencing some very horrible things, that they can still find their voice, still find light. It's quite remarkable on how it changes those who help folks. You can see a lot of things are possible. So it matters when you spend time to listen to folks' stories, even if they're very tragic. And my brother has done that especially. But hope comes from witnessing crazy things that have happened to you that changed. So it changes you too.
You had written about hope and anger and despair and injustice. Brian Stevenson, fear and anger can lead to injustice. I mean, certainly that is how dictators take power and get people to turn against each other by using fear and anger.
Yeah, and I think, we're seeing that now all across the world. There's been an emergence of what I call the politics of fear and anger. And when you look at the 20th century, the worst moments in that century were the moments when fear and anger prevailed and really horrible things happened. The Holocaust is a consequence of narratives of fear and anger reigning in Germany and then throughout Europe and causing the death of millions of people. We had a Rwandan genocide just 32 years ago, where a narrative of fear and anger spread through that country and hundreds of thousands of people were killed. We're in the midst of, I think, a political moment when there are a lot of people preaching fear and anger. And of course the challenge is that when you allow yourself to be governed by fear and governed by anger, you start to tolerate things you wouldn't otherwise tolerate. You start to accept things you wouldn't otherwise accept. So many of the behaviors that are problematic, which Howard has to deal with, are rooted in a kind of anger and fear that is governing people's actions, even overriding their better judgment. And so this hope question becomes important, because I think that hopelessness is the enemy of injustice. It is the opposite of injustice, and it's an orientation of the spirit. And I think the benefit of at least our upbringing was that it was very much rooted in the Black experience in this country, and we're not that far away from our enslaved great-grandparents. Our family line is pretty short, because my great-grandfather was 50 when my grandmother was born. She was 40 when my mother was born. My mom was in the 30s when I was born. And so that narrative is very connected. And so we've been fortunate to understand what enslaved people had to endure, survive, to prevail. And it was a hope narrative. And those who survived lynching and terror violence, going to Philadelphia from Virginia was an act of courage and hope that you could step away from that lynching violence, even navigating segregation, like our father did, despite that constant humiliation, that constant exclusion, to still hold on to your dignity, to believe that you were worth the respect of other people, that you were not inferior to anyone, was rooted in a kind of hope. And I think that's the legacy we were given. I've been living in Montgomery now for close to 40 years, and I am in this city where a generation ago, people put on their Sunday best and would go to push for the right to vote and the right to participate and not be excluded, and they'd be on their knees praying and get battered and bloodied and beaten, and they would go home, wipe the blood off, change their clothes, and go back and do it again. They did so much more with so much less. And so for me, it would seem ungrateful. It would seem dishonest to not recognize that I have to be hopeful about what I can do in this moment, despite the ugliness of this moment, given what our ancestors have done before.
Indeed, and I'm thinking, Howard, you're a psychologist, so you've had to deal with human beings and human nature. I mean, how much do you think trauma is part of what creates fear or anger?
Oh, it's a big part, and it doesn't go away unless you address it. Even when we forget our trauma, sometimes it shows up at the most difficult or challenging spaces. There's a way in which When we tell our stories, though, and we actually can access what trauma has done to our bodies, to our thoughts, to our feelings. One argument, growing up in a black church, where you don't always know what the future is going to be, that sense of faith has led you to believe in things that you can't quite see yet. There's also a reality of facing things that are hard to know. All right, knowing our history is difficult, but it's actually salvific in its capacity to heal us for future kinds of struggles. And so the idea that we can get over stress and trauma, one argument for why we want to stand up to injustice and hate is that we get a chance to heal from the trauma that we are still going to face, even if we are afraid to.
Yeah. I'm thinking, and Brian, I'll go back to you, and I'm thinking of, the museum the Legacy Museum that you helped to found, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, why it's so important for us to understand, deal with, contend with our history, sort of like you were saying, Howard, for us human beings to understand where we came from is very helpful, and it's good to tell those stories. And yet, there's pushback, as we all know, there's pushback about our history and, erasing people out of the history books or putting in people who don't actually deserve to be there.